Tonight's other big story, Jacinda Ardern says she's open to tweaking the controversial Three Waters scheme. It comes after some mayors, including those in our two biggest cities, joined forces to come up with a water reform plan of their own. The mayors of Auckland, Christchurch and Waimakariri stepping up to the plate with what they say is a common sense solution to the country's water woes.
We need a better proposal than today as a start.
For us, it's always been about ownership, effective control and influence.
That's at odds with the government's plan to do away with council-owned water, wastewater and stormwater services and to move them into 4 publicly owned regional entities. The Prime Minister says she's listening, but her priority is keeping costs low.
Of course, we've said we're open to making refinements and changes that improve the reforms here that are just so necessary.
The mayors agree reform and more money are needed, but they want to decide for themselves how to work with mana whenua rather than having it dictated by central government.
This is about providing a solution to the difficult problem of improving Auckland's and New Zealand's three water supply systems in a manner that doesn't become divisive for our country.
It's already divisive, these mayors hoping the politicians will switch to their rules. Well, let's break this down now with law professor Chris Gallavin. Hi there, Chris. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Do councils have any sway over this when it comes to Three Waters, or ultimately will central government have the final say?
Well, ultimately, central government has final say because legislation has final say, and there's legislation going through at the moment. It's probably the first of many pieces of legislation to enact this, but it's likely the most significant. It's still in the public submission phase. It hasn't got to the second reading yet. There is a window for which we as members of the public and also councils can make submissions to change. But let's make it clear, let's be clear, it's not a legal process so much with councils, it's a political one, and they will have, I think, quite significant sway simply because the discussion and the rhetoric around the country, particularly with the local government elections just finished, was quite strong, was quite fire and brimstone, one might say, and dividing communities against the government or on the side of government, and what we see today is quite a reconciliatory tone being set by 3 mayors.
What did you make of the alternative plan put forward by the mayors to keep some of the key elements of the government's plan but maintain that local ownership?
I must admit I was quite surprised and pleasantly surprised by the tone of it, because they clearly thought that, you know, a combative relationship with central government was not the angle that they wanted to take, notwithstanding that perhaps some of them on their campaign trails were rather combative. So they tried to strike a reconciliatory tone there by saying, hey, we acknowledge that reform needs to happen. We just think that it needs to happen in a way different to the way the government is proposing at the moment. It remains to be seen as to whether the government see this as, in a sense, a get-out-of-jail card for an issue that is increasingly becoming hot and troubled for them, or whether they'll carry on in the same direction that they're heading at the moment.
OK, so just quickly, what pathways are still open then for local and central government to reach some sort of compromise over this?
Well, central government can just truck on in the direction that it's taking at the moment. It can go through the legislative process. It's got the numbers. It can likely get it through. But, of course, it's going to have to weigh up its political future as to whether the government feels that the headwind it's facing from local government, but also the community, is too strong. And if they do feel that, then perhaps they've got actually a viable alternative that's not let's throw it all out and start again or do nothing, but is actually a viable alternative of taking some components of what they're suggesting and not others in a way forward that perhaps will bring more people with them.
It would be great to put this one to bed, wouldn't it? Hey, Chris, thanks very much for your analysis tonight.
No problem.